Welcome to the Diversity and Inclusion on Air podcast. The podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill. I'm the Senior Director for Institutional Research and Diversity at the AAVMC. Now, today's topic is something I've been kicking around for a long time and thinking about, especially in the last year or so, because I see some real patterns, sometimes that can be a little bit concerning in social justice work or diversity, equity, and inclusion work, these patterns don't allow for kind of this corrective redemption, if you will, some restoration. So this pattern, really, this is kind of how it looks. Someone does something racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, transphobic, or otherwise offensive. Often it's caught on video. And or it's in a comment section on social media, or some other kind of documented thing, right? There's a reaction to the incident. It often goes, air quote, viral. And in the process, what ends up happening is the person who committed the offense ends up being doxxed, i.e. all of their personal information kind of gets out there in the universe. Folks are looking to fire them. Sometimes they get death threats, all of these kinds of things. And so then that, the offender becomes the target of bad behavior under the guise of accountability. Now, I am all about accountability and consequences for your actions, but I'm also a proponent of creating space for growth, lessons learned, education, compassion, and an opportunity for redemption, right? Not everyone is going to go that path, right? But, I'm hopeful. I haven't completely abandoned hope yet. This is kind of hard to practice, though, in a cycle that really oftentimes comes down to kind of these two options. And those options are either maintaining the status quo or full-scale destruction, elimination, or air quote, canceling, right? And so today's show is really about, creating space for restorative justice, and what can that look like? So, long intro to today's show. To talk about this, I am delighted to welcome my trusted pal over from AVMA, Dr. Jen Brandt, to chat about council culture, restorative justice, and everything in between. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Dr. Greenhill. It's a pleasure to be here today.
It is great to see you. This is my buddy for shows that are really touchy. I call him Jen. So why don't we just get on into it? Let's talk about some definitions that kind of set the scene a little bit. And so, I've got this list that, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what does justice mean and accountability and all of these kinds of things. So justice is what? It's people kind of getting what they deserve, if you will, right? That's kind of supposed to be what it is. I do like Cornel West talks about justice being what love looks like in public.
I like
which
that.
I really like. But any thoughts on, how do you frame justice?
Yeah, I'd say it's a tricky definition because it's often associated with fairness, which it isn't, right? It isn't fair. Or making something right, but it's really been more of a legal term that the law decides what makes it right, and not necessarily in the eyes of the person who experienced the harm.
Right. Yeah. And so, we talk about these things, and when this kind of cycle happens, right? And it is very much this cycle, and we see it all over and over and over and over again, where ultimately what people want when something kind of goes down, right, is accountability, right? That's really what we want. And so we want folks to be held accountable, which is kind of a part of that justice kind of umbrella. It kind of comes under there. but it really is about, you know, you gotta own up to the consequences. Like you did what did they say? You did the crime, you do the time. Of course, we know that like that's not real, but like, I mean, you know, it's supposed to be, but there's a lot of evidence that that's not real either. So what about reconciliation and restoration?
So again, the tricky when we look at the definition versus what we really want out of it. When we look at reconciliation, one of the definitions, which I don't like, is make friendly again, which is a definition of it. I think where I struggle with the term reconciliation is it's so often lumped in with forgiveness. And you and I have had long chats about that in my perspectives on kind of forced forgiveness and the social pressure to forgive, but even further, a social pressure to reconcile. And a person who's been harmed can make peace with what happened, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to reconcile with the source of that harm.
Yeah, you know, so often when we see, you know, kind of a major event, you know, just the Charleston Nine and the shooting in Mother Emanuel a few years ago, you know, literally the next day, the media were like, so, oh, wow. So, you know, do you forgive the person who did this? And I'm like, okay, but we haven't cleaned the blood out of the sanctuary yet. I'm gonna need you to go go take a couple of walks around the world while we get ourselves together. You know, and like there is this push for forgiveness, as you mentioned, and this reconciliation, like, oh, okay, we're gonna be cool again. No, not exactly, right? You know, and then finally, I kind of wanted to set the stage with cancel culture, so I went down a rabbit hole.
So did I.
So I can't wait to hear what rabbit hole you went down. But the first time, apparently, that this kind of term canceling was popularized in some way was from a Nile Rodgers song in 1981.
Chic.
Right, for folks that are like, you know, unfamiliar, you don't know necessarily who Nile Rodgers is, like a great icon, you know, freak out fame, right? But he had this song where, you know, he was trying to kind of date this woman, and the woman just really kind of only wanted him because he was Nile Rodgers and was like, I want the perks of your fame. And so he talked about canceling, your love is canceled. Right. I found that fascinating. I was like, how did I not know this, right? And then after that, did you detour to New Jack City?
I did. I got to New Jack City.
So we detoured to New Jack City, which is actually, you know, low-key one of my favorite movies of all time. And I remember the line where they talk about, you know, a character is canceled because, you know, they said she was a traitor, right? And so this idea of cancel culture is not new. But then kind of in the early aughts, when in the birth of Twitter, you know, on Twitter, Black users often kind of use this term to say, you know, so-and-so is canceled because, you know, they did something that, you know, the community disagrees with or an individual disagrees with. Like, so for example, R. Kelly, canceled. Right? Canceled, right? And so Jeff Epstein, canceled. Like those kinds of things, you know, David Duke, canceled, right? I mean, never mind. Anyway, so, you know, so there's this kind of, and it really what it is this public disapproval, and it is a form of ostracism. So, you know, it's your, you know, for those literary folks, Hester Prynne and Scarlet Letter, it's really like, that's what it's supposed to be about. Like, you know, it's not that they're never supposed to come out again, but like they wear that, you know, that disapproval kind of like, hey, there it is. you can continue on, but don't expect much from us. So is that the rabbit hole you went down? Did you get more? What'd you get?
Yes.
What'd you get?
I think I am such a nerd. So yes, I went on the same rabbit hole and then followed it to Lil Wayne and videos. And what was interesting to me, and then it did, as you said, made it to Black Twitter, Black queer Twitter specifically.
Yes.
And what's interesting is, though, it was really just the word cancel in the beginning. The culture came later, and I know we'll talk about that, but this concept of it was simply about accountability.
Yeah.
And it was communities that had not had a voice, who had not had any power of influence. And it was a way to just say, we're holding you accountable. And what's also interesting to me is the same community, the Black community, were really the first to critique the concept with the reasons you gave. They said, we want to keep the element of accountability, and at the same time, we believe in reform. We believe in rehabilitation. We believe in somebody being able to say, I made a mistake. I want to come back in that process. And so, how do we keep the accountability without necessarily shaming somebody into disappearing? And it was really when white culture, this discomfort that came about from a community in the white community that got away with behaviors that caused harm forever, right? And now all of a sudden there was this tool that could call somebody out, and you didn't have to have a ton of money or power. You could get on social media and call somebody out. Well, imagine the discomfort of what happens when you go from having zero accountability to now public accountability. And that sense of, I don't want to be held accountable, became something to push back against. And so then we were labeling it cancel culture.
Yeah.
Then we weaponized that, like we weaponized the term woke, and I mean the white community. I'm going to own that. And then that became the issue. Well, you're just trying to cancel people. Well, no, we're trying to hold people accountable, and that is an appropriate social action in a world, where we want people to thrive.
Yeah. I mean, it really wasn't supposed to be, go off into the island in the middle of the Pacific to never be heard from again, right? There is go off, take your time, and maybe in a year you can kind of come back, right? So I also kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit hole prepping for the show and thinking about cancel culture and the Me Too movement, right? And how many folks kind of came tumbling down and were canceled in some way, right? So there were very public people who lost their jobs, right? There were public people, like we still haven't heard from Matt Lauer. Like, I don't know where he is, but I'm sure he's doing just fine. Like, he was really, really rich. He's gonna be okay. Like, I'm sure he's happy. He's sad he's not on TV anymore. However, he's going to be okay. But things like, I think it was like less than a year later, C.K. Lewis was back doing stand-up, and people were like, bruh, it might be a little too soon, right? It might be a little too soon, and we haven't seen you do anything. Again, being held accountable to these behaviors. Like, you haven't acknowledged that you did this. You haven't tried to figure out how to make it right. And now you're just back out to telling jokes. No. Right. And so it was like, no. Back to the cancel corner for you for a little while longer, right? Because we need to see behavioral change. And really that's what it was originally kind of conceived as. Like, it doesn't have to be forever. Grace is available to those who seek it. Redemption is available to those who seek it. If you don't seek it, then you get to stay over there and we're all cool. But, we have this friction and it has been weaponized, and it's been kind of, hey, people want PC culture. People don't want us to be able to say the things that, we want to say. And what about free speech? And I'm like, hey, you can say whatever you want to say. But again, we get to this accountability and the consequences of collective actions, right? So in thinking about that, redemption and restoration is available for those who want it. This is a great tie-in. Let's see that smooth transition into the concept of restorative justice. So what'd you find? Because Jen and I have been reading about this for like weeks now. What'd you find?
Again, so interesting. One, great evidence of cultural appropriation through the years, right? So the earliest signs of restorative justice back to original indigenous people, Native Americans and First Nation in Canada and Africa and Asia. It was really for centuries that was the case, and then got introduced this concept of punishment. Right. Instead of making right, more punishing wrong. Like there was this shift that happened. And then over the centuries, even more, that sending out punishment then became more of an act of the state against the offender, and the victim, the person who was actually harmed in the process, somehow completely got cut out of the process. And then the term itself, I think, is credited, and of course, history may have written itself conveniently, but credited to a psychologist, Albert Eglash, who wrote a paper using the term in the 70s. And then right in that same time period in the 70s, both in Canada, at least in the US, and I'm sure elsewhere, there was talk then. It was not called restorative justice then. It was victim offender mediation or victim offender reconciliation. So this concept came on board to at least bring the parties who have been harmed back in, if they choose to be, in the way that they choose to be, so that they have a voice in the process as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, if any of our viewers or listeners have been a victim of a crime or know someone who has and kind of has gone through the full adjudication of that, following that event, that, they might check in with you, but you don't really get a whole lot of say, right?
No.
That you really just don't. They just kind of are reporting back to you what's going to happen next, what the DA is going to do, what the judge is going to do, what the probation, it is like looking into a window. Like you're not in the space where it's happening. You just get to look at it, even though the whole process is about something that happened to you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My background is in working with survivors of crime and trauma. And I found the court system, again, when we call it the justice system, that was not my experience. It wasn't necessarily just. So if you were a victim of a crime, it often got taken out of your hands. So the process was happening at you, but honestly, you were incidental. The outcome may have not been anything that you wanted or asked for. You may not have even wanted to participate in the process, and the law may have mandated that you did, even though you had a better sense of what might keep you safe. And so, when it's only handled in the court and there's no other process about it, the voice of the people who have been harmed is often lost and negated.
Yeah. And so when we pull that out of kind of the criminal justice space, which is really kind of where this work is primarily taking place, that in the criminal justice space, as well as K through 12 education, and kind of thinking about how we help young people mediate conflict, right? When we talk about it through the lens of social justice work or DEI efforts, say here in Vet Med, we really just want to be able to drill down and say, okay, all of this stuff that's happening around is happening, but that doesn't actually truly address the harm that has been done. That those calls for accountability sometimes are off the mark. And it's because, as I mentioned in the opening, we think of this binary, right? So if the offender gets to keep their job, or if they get to, or if, because HR issues are private, right? So you're not going to hear what's going to happen. It just looks like, well, you didn't do anything, so we want them fired, right? And that's it. It's very much a binary, rather than thinking about how do we come to resolution? And that doesn't mean that we're going to be friends. It doesn't mean we're going to go for a beer afterward. It doesn't mean that we're even going to say anything more than an acknowledgement pleasantry when we pass each other in the hallway in our workspace. It means that we are going to sit down and have a conversation about what happened and talk about how do we move past this and how do we make it right. So is that kind of what, so how do we do that? What are the elements? Like, right, let's talk about, just some of those kind of the big thematic pieces, right? So, we have to be able to say, hey, there's this thing that happened that you did and it hurt me, right? And again, it's about giving the victim this space, right, to and voice to say that. Oftentimes that gets lost. So what are some of the other elements?
Yeah. And I think of a safe space to say that, right? Because victims have certainly spoken up in the past. And then even though it's illegal now to have any kind of retribution happen to you, there are many people who can say it happened anyway. I got silenced. I didn't get put on committees. I was labeled a problem. My hours start, right? So it's really about creating a safe space. So it is about a dialogue. Really, the elements are you come to the table. Is that what all the parties want, with heavy attention on what the victim is asking for? Having that full reconciliation where somebody says, as you said, I harmed, and being really clear and no excuses, right? Well, I harmed you, but or I'm sorry you were harmed. Like, right. No, I'm sorry I did the thing that caused the harm. And sometimes, generally you might want a mediator or some neutral present in the room. Sometimes there's restitution involved. Sometimes there's community service involved, but it really begins with this, contact, this communication that is safe and appropriate for all parties.
Yeah. I mean, and this is one of those things where sometimes a simple apology, a real apology, we'll get to that in a minute, a real apology fixes enormous problems, right? But this is also why, when we see someone, again, social media can be great, but it also is just,
not great sometimes.
It's just trash. Right. But this is kind of, they call it like the iOS apology, right? And so, the celebrity taps out something on their little phone in notes and then like posts it somewhere on the Twitters or Instagram or, for those of us, folks of a certain age, Facebook, and they put it up there and then the public that is looking for this accountability then begins to pick apart the apology. And I want to be really, really clear about why they pick it apart. When apologies say things like, I'm sorry, you were fill in the blank offended.
I'm sorry, but.
Right.
Yes.
That is not a genuine apology. That does not accept responsibility. It is, hey, you woke up and you were super sensitive. And like, if somebody else had said this, you probably wouldn't have been offended, right? Today. Or on next Friday, if you had seen whatever I said, then, you probably would have reacted different. It is that like, all of this is on you. Your reaction is your problem. And yes, we do take responsibility for our individual behaviors and reactions. But if you did harm, you got to own that, right? And so, this piece of what does repairing harm look like, right? And so, Jen, what are some of the ways where, what can that look like? What can we do?
It's interesting.
People how to say, I'm sorry, like they should have been taught in kindergarten.
I will say though, that's one of the foundational skills when we take a look at this work. And a lot of times people say, well, how do you do DEI? Right. And I think they're expecting a big grand answer some of the time. And the answer, some of the answers are big and grand. often they are so foundational. And one of them is how to do an apology. So it's the I statement. I did something. You name the harm. No but, no excuse. Sometimes it's I've explored how that came to be, and I take full responsibility for that as well. Now, maybe with your therapist, you can talk about all the elements that contributed, but the person you've harmed, that's not relevant. You've done the harm, you own that, and you name the harm.
Yeah.
Then you apologize sincerely for the harm. And if appropriate, if the setting calls for it, it might be, these are the things that I'm going to do. I think of programs like 12-step programs that even talk about living amends, that sometimes it's a harm to the person to contact them and apologize. Like, just because you want to be sorry and be forgiven doesn't mean the other person wants it. So again, it's always that the other person is engaging in this and willing and able to have that happen safely. And then it may be offering, these are the steps that I'm going to do. It's interesting, the science behind it. Some will say that you then ask for forgiveness. I don't find that that is helpful, because I don't find that the person owes you that. What you can say is, I will spend from now until the end of time doing better. Yeah. And this is the way I'm going to do better. But that other person is maybe not going to be around to praise you and thank you. Like, that isn't their job. It's yours to go do better. So there is a whole science behind apology. Even in the healthcare world, there's an I'm sorry works movement isn't the right word, but it's escaping me right now, that really talks about that and how you do a good apology. But we're talking also fundamental skills like empathy and reflective listening, that when done well, and including when an apology is done well, they can do imaging on your brain and see that certain areas of the brain have activated. So one of the areas of the brain would be the reward center when it's been done well. So it does have this healing effect. Yeah. And it can also cause harm when it is not done well.
Yeah. Yeah. It is this idea of, yes, I am so sorry. I'm going to do right. I'm going to do better. Can you ever forgive me? Not right now. Like, that is not the time. Right. Because it gets back to that. We're putting that pressure. One, they don't owe you that, but they're also putting this pressure, because then guess who gets to be the bad guys then?
That's right. That's right.
Don't extend forgiveness, right? And so, and this is restorative justice, restorative practices are victim-centered, right?
Yes.
And I also want to kind of just address this terminology victim, right? Because I think that gets thrown around a lot as well, because folks are like, you just want to be a victim so bad when someone says something racist, sexist, or homophobic, ableist, whatever it is. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be a victim. Like, no one wants to have these experiences that are harmful, right? We're not just kind of trolling, like, let me see if I can just go to the Safeway today and troll down the aisle and maybe someone will say something nasty to me and, we get to ruin everyone's day. Like, that's not really kind of how it works. And so this idea is that when we say victim, no, people are actually hurt, and words do hurt. I know that a lot of times we talk about 6 and stones will break your bones. Yes. We get all that. But it is in spite of, right? It's not, it is, these things really do hurt. And so there is a victimization there. And a right, and wrongs do need to be righted, right? So why is this so hard, Jen? Why is it so hard?
Oh God, because we're human. Right. I think about the times when I've harmed somebody. It just sucks, right? It sucks to be called out. It sucks to be, that's probably not appropriate terminology for your podcast, but that's Jen speak. It is painful to look somebody in the eye and actually look at yourself in the mirror first and say, I have done something, whether intended or not is irrelevant. I have done something that had an impact of harming somebody. And it is so hard to sit with the discomfort of that I think even the example you were giving, when we say, well, some people want to be victims, that is an easy default. If I apologize and the person, God forbid, the person I've harmed isn't super gracious about it and just falling over themselves to thank me for my apology, well, they just want to, they just want to be a victim. So it's once again deflecting. Well, they have every right to respond however they would want to. It doesn't negate what I have done. So I think that just that fundamental piece of sitting with pain that we have caused, I think we're hardwired not to do that. Mm-hmm. And when we do, we will absolutely fundamentally believe that they just don't understand us, right? I'm being misinterpreted. And it's easy to fall on that instead of, again, none of that matters. I harmed somebody and I got to own up to it. And so I think just at the root, I think we as human beings can really struggle with that concept.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't just feel risky. It is risky, right? Because
yes.
The hole can get deeper.
Yes,
the hole can get deeper, and none of us are immune to this. There are things that happened 20 years ago that every now and again I'm like, I really messed that up and I never really apologized and I didn't make it right. And is it too late? Or boy, I remember it like it was yesterday and I know that had to hurt. Whoa. That really sucks, right? And now all these years later, I'm like, well, can I still make it right? Can I still, what does forgiveness look like? And that person may have forgiven me, but again, forgiveness also does not mean forgive and forget. Right. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be cool. It just means I'm going to start dragging you on Twitter. Like that's what it means. Like it means
I love the definition that I heard, and I'm crediting it to Oprah, but I actually believe Oprah may have credited it to somebody else. So if somebody has the direct source, but just that forgiveness is simply saying, I accept what is. It does not mean I'm saying it's okay. It does not mean I'm saying it doesn't have any effect on my life. It is like it happened. And so by forgiving, quote unquote, my energy is no longer going into, well, why did that happen? And I'm going to be mad. Like it did. I'm at the place where I know it did happen and I'm looking forward. So that is what forgiveness is. That is why reconciliation can't automatically be tacked onto it, because by accepting what is, I tell people sometimes forgiveness is almost the sure step that you will not be reconciling, that I am so at peace with what is that I accept that you are not capable of better. You will not ever be able to earn my trust. You have demonstrated, and I get that so well now that you and I are never going to be hanging out again, right? And that is the fullest expression of forgiveness. But I think social pressure, religious programming, like so many things, and again, I think our hardwiring to be connected, like so many things make that a very messy, difficult process for us.
Yeah. So we've been really down and dirty and keeping it 100 on the show today. So, I think that I also want to talk about how folks might go about deciding whether or not to just cancel. And I'm not talking, I'm just walking away. Like I'm dragging on Twitter and then like, boom, I'm done. Or, hey, I'm going to take a different path and really say, let's see if we can have a meeting of the minds in a way that is restorative, that there is a possibility of reconciliation, that at least we can get on the same page about what happened, the harm that was done, and how we can grow from it. Right. Yeah. So do you have your own criteria?
I do. I will say, I mean, some of it comes down to a moral compass, at least for me. And sometimes my moral compass fails. I will be the first one to say, I'm just going to own that right there.
Right.
So one thing I think about is what is safe? What is safe for me? What is the other party? Like, I just need to start at the basics. And then I have a mantra that kind of goes through my head. That's, do you want to be right? Or do you want a right world? And so, that asked me to look at my motives. Like sometimes I might be feeling real petty that day. And I just have to own that, right? Because then that's going to come with a set of consequences that down the road may not feel so good. So what are my motives? What are my desired outcomes? and then being true to that. And so if you're asking, do you want to be right or do you want a right world? Sometimes the steps are the same. They will look the same, but sometimes they won't. Right. So sometimes you would take a certain set of actions if you just want to be right, and to heck with it. And by the way, you may be justified. It's why the work is so much deeper than that. And it's not so simple. And you'll even have people say, oh, you were right to do that. But like, something about it just deep inside may not sit right with you, or it may sit right with you then, but not 5 minutes or 5 weeks down the road. So that for me is the determinant. It's not that there's a one right path or a one wrong path. Is it safe? What is motivating me? What do I most want? I think what creates the greatest good in the world. And again, holding myself accountable to that, knowing that some days I'm like, I don't care about the greatest good right now. I'm just feeling petty. petty. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with all of that. But I also think about time, right? And sometimes I need a day or so to really process what happened. Right. What was said, what was done, whatever it was. Were there witnesses? Is there will speaking out about it in public spaces create more harm than good? I have super petty days as well. But do I believe that this person is capable of redemption? And I will be completely honest. There are folks that I'm like, no. So right. And I just speed on past, right? Lick my wounds. But I do, Patricia Lowry told me, I remember asking her for advice one time, and she, and I tell people this advice that she gave me years ago, and it is, what does success look like? Right? What does success look like? And I often kind of pull that out the back pocket to help guide me, usually out of my petty hole, like, what does success look like? And say, okay, like, is there something that can come out of this? What does healing look like for me? And is there an opportunity here to really, do something good, right? And sometimes, oftentimes, there is. Oftentimes there is. And I think that it is really important, though, for folks to know, we are all going to, at some point in our lives, either have been or will be on one side of this. Like, we will be the offender or we will be the victim, right? I think that reflecting on our positionality is important. I think that thinking about, what do I really need to heal? Right? What do I need to heal? If I am the offender, tell me what it is that I need to do to make this right. Like, because oftentimes we don't ask. A lot of times, and this isn't just in terms of, offenses or whatever. A lot of times we just don't ask people what they need. We just say, okay, here's the menu of options. Pick one that's closest to whatever it is that you, are looking for. And, not all jigsaw puzzles are going to fit together. Pieces are going to fit together. And so, it really is about also embracing some humility there.
Oh gosh.
And that's hard. Like, it's hard. Trying to say, I really messed up. And I caused a lot of drama. And now, like, I've closed all my social media accounts because because things got really weird. And how do I make this right? What do I do? Tell me what to do. And I think that, those are things that really kind of try to guide me. I try to think about my positionality. And I also, even as a victim, once I have had that time to process, think petty thoughts, figure out how big the hole that your body is going to fit in, needs to be like, and I pull back, then I really try to say, all right, what does compassion look like? And what does empathy look like? What would make someone do this?
Yes.
Right. What would make what is so wrong in this situation that would prompt this type of behavior? And that is oftentimes what I can get to drag me back to the table and say, okay, I really would like to have a conversation about this. And yeah, we might need a third party so that it doesn't turn into a WWE Monday Night Raw event.
Yeah, a couple things pictures were running through my brain as I was listening to you. And I think one of them is, again, with this cancel culture, often there's a person harmed and we feel such indignation about it that we pile on and we never ask the person harmed, do you want me to pile on? So sometimes we inadvertently cause more harm. In fact, we'll see this play out on social media where the person is saying, I am not asking you to do this. In fact, please stop. And we are so justified in our outrage and anger that we continue to pile on. So I think that's just an awareness. And then I think you said that time to step back and reflect. I think really knowing what your core values are. And I'll often come back to that as my own exercise. Like, let's just revisit my core values. And am I being consistent with that? And in line with the petty, I often say that, that really working in alignment with your values and taking what I call the high road and coming back to a place of compassion and empathy. There are times when it's just like, I don't want to adult today. I just don't want to. I want to sit on the floor and pound and scream and just be mad. And what I try to do is allow myself. Now, by the way, I don't publicly, like in the grocery store, fall out and have a scene, but I like, Brandt, you get that today. So where you don't harm anybody, you get to journal it, you get to say it, you get to process it with a friend. And I might need 24 if I've been really harmed and fear has been activated and anger has been activated, I'm going to need more than a minute to do that, 24, 48 hours, then come back to my value system. And like you, even though sometimes it feels like an agonizing process, I will say for me, 99.9% of the time, I can come back to empathy. It might take me a minute. It might feel like I am really all exhausted by the time I get there.
Yeah.
But that by and large, most people are not wired to actively, purposely cause harm. I've said before that there's a few percentage in the population that do, but the rest of us are causing harm without intending and without knowing any different. So what led to that? Also, what led to my reaction the way I did, because somebody else might not be reacting the same way I do. So a little self-awareness. And then with that sense of compassion, can I approach it with empathy? And I will say, if we're looking at fair, is it fair to have to be the adult who's been harmed to come back? No. But is there a higher value than that? Like the true meaning of justice, I consider a higher value than fair. We're really working toward a right world with real justice. And so the higher value, can we come back to that? But all of this to say it's hard work. It's ongoing process. You're going to have petty moments because you're human. The goal is to mitigate the harm to the extent that we can in that process, and then come back to the table aligned with your true values, willing to own your behavior and do better going forward.
Yeah. So, you brought up a group that we haven't talked about because we've been really focused on the victim and the offender. And that's the bystanders, either in real time bystanders or the aftermath bystanders, right? And when things go viral and there's the piling on, right?
Yeah.
The pile on can be very devastating. But what folks I don't think always realize is that it can be devastating for both parties involved. One, the victim oftentimes loses control of their narrative for their story.
That's right.
Right? When it goes viral. And and for the offender, oftentimes those types of reactions where everybody is kind of piling on and retweeting and oh my God, for the person, the offender, I'm coming from a Judeo-Christian background, so there's the thing in Exodus where God hardens the heart of Pharaoh, right? And so that it can be, the result of it can make folks double down on the bad behavior, right?
Yes.
Because again, admitting that you did something bad can be really, really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And so then that person, don't worry, they still have a community that they can run to and that they can go to, but sometimes the unintended consequence of these viral events are that any chance for restoration, any chance for growth for the offender is also shut down because there is absolutely no compassion and no empathy. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that it's all roses and champagne and like, oh my God, Jeff did this thing and it was, but I really think that we need to be very mindful when we're sharing and retweeting and everything, because one, the victim may be losing control of their story and what they want. And oftentimes in the moment that something was posted, that moment passes. Mm-hmm. Right? And you can't get it back because it's just out there. And I'm thinking about the recent, was this last week? The recent, yes, if you're not on social media and you're kind of under a rock, there was a huge blowout last week at, a Victoria's Secret in New Jersey, where, as to quote Victoria's Secret, there was an altercation between two customers. And I'm like, between probably wasn't the right word. Altercation, probably not the right word either, but it was really ugly, right? And so a white woman who I think may have had some other issues melted all the way down, like ice cream, cement, summertime, melted down. And Black woman was continuously asked to change her behavior to accommodate this meltdown. And she recorded it, she uploaded it, she's kind of given, she put it out there, and then it kind of spun out. So a few days, it went viral, and the coverage then actually became more about her than it did about, the person who assaulted her, the person who had this bad reaction, right? And she has continued to try to control her narrative, like on YouTube, and she was like, I don't want to give interviews because of the way that folks are approaching me as though I prompted this bad behavior. And so I think that it is worth the caution when we are sharing things, when we're piling on, when we believe that what we're doing is supportive. Just recognize that support can not be supportive.
Yeah, I would say if your audience takes anything away, I hope they are really listening to this. That piling on mentality, again, in our brain, we know why we're doing it. We think we're uplifting a voice. Yeah. I always say, did the voice ask for your help? Because in this case, the person who'd been victimized did, but she was very explicit about what would be helpful. It was not sharing the video 1,000 times. It was not commenting on it. She had a very specific ask. So meet that need. So there's that piling on. And then it's interesting in my career as a social worker, I've worked with people as clients who've been on either side of that. And often on the victim side of it, it's just overwhelming. As you said, it is not being viewed as helpful. They will say, they are speaking up for me because they think I don't have a voice. What do they think they are doing? They've stolen my voice. Right. They've made it worse for me. They've made it so I can't go to my job and try to live my normal life. Like I was coping with it okay. The helpers did that to me. And I know when we're engaging in those behaviors, we are not thinking about it from that perspective. We also don't really ever have the facts. We were not there. And yes, I know we see video footage, but we don't see all of the video footage. And again, the person that's central to the story was not asking for our help in that way. So I hope people take that message to heart, that there are ways to help and there are ways to be allies and amplify the voices. But, man, get an invitation first,
Yes.
and honor the
And
wishes.
follow directions.
And follow directions. Yeah. Like what is helpful for you may very well not at all be helpful for someone else at best, and may cause active harm at worst.
Yeah. Follow directions. Ask them again. Oftentimes we don't, we keep coming back to this. We don't ask people what they need. We come up with what we believe are appropriate, solutions. And again, oftentimes they're on a binary.
Yes.
It's like total devastation and annihilation versus, nothing. Right. It's all or nothing. And that's really not the world that we live in. So really do ask folks. So as we get ready to wrap up, how do we try to really practice this in our colleges, in our practices, in our workplaces, in our friend groups? Because, a lot of us don't admit that we're petty. Looks into camera. We are.
I am at times. I'm gonna own that all day. So again, when we look at the continuum of justice, there was the retribution and punitive. We've got restorative justice. There's a move now into something called transformative justice. And so when we think about if we've caused a harm and we try to fix the harm, that's great, right? But what led to that? What led to those conditions that created that moment that made it be possible? So again, it's not this big grand answer that people are looking for, but it's being curious, identifying your values, and then asking questions like, how do we teach children about concepts like consent and accountability? Can you imagine raising a generation of kids who can look you in the eye? And of course the parents, right? We the adults are responsible for that. So what does accountability look like? What does a just world look like? What conditions are are being created that allow this escalation of harm? Is the process of us trying to right the harm causing more violence and harm because we want a technique that's not? This is about empathy. It's about reflective listening. It's about the art of an actual effective apology. It's listening to people. So some of these are core fundamental skills that I think because they're fundamental, we think we all have them. And yet we don't. We clearly do not all have them. And that, I think, is the foundation that we build. Though that creates the bigger ripple effect where we can then bring in more prevention so that we hopefully have less of these incidents to manage going forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely great. And so, I would say for our member institutions at AVMC, when something kind of goes down, and we know it's going to go down, something's always going to happen, right? Extend that invitation, have that talk with the victim, ask if this is a path that they want to go down, because again, it is victim-centered, and then invite that offender, then invite the offender to see if that's something that, they're willing to engage in, and seek out that mediation, seek out if you're not, don't have some good skills in conflict resolution, get them. Get them. Lots of places you can do that. So hit the Googles, but really extend the offer of invitation to engage in this type of process where, there is the acknowledgement that harm has been done. There is an appropriate opportunity for the victim to have their say in a constructive way, that there's an opportunity for the offender to ask what would make amends, right?
Yes.
And really genuinely sit there and kind of try to work through that. And again, it doesn't mean that, everybody, is going to be all peachy keen and just, in love at the end, but that there's some resolution and that there's peace and that, folks can move forward in really constructive ways. And so, I would definitely say, let's all try to take the necessary time for that process, for individual processing, but then really find ways to see if there is an opportunity for reconciliation and restoration. That is not absent of HR consequences,
That's
but
right.
in addition to, right? This is really about accountability. So anything else you are burning to share?
No, as always, I always enjoy the questions that you ask. You always make my brain hurt a little bit, because you have that capacity to ask question. I always consider it like peeling the onion, like, and then what? And then what? So thank you, because you make me grow. You make me be better. So I appreciate the questions that you asked, and I hope people are able to take some nuggets from this that they can apply right away in their lives.
Yes. I will say that I am really committed to practicing this. And guess what? It's good for home life too. Like,
yes, it is.
Right. Just really kind of thinking about what these principles mean. So, Jen, as always, you're one of the few people I will have this kind of conversation with in a very public way, live stream. There it is out there. Thank you to Dr. Carey, Dr. Stone in the chat here live on the live stream. Thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, I think we'll wrap this episode. This has been another episode of AAVMC's Diversity and Inclusion on Air. Jen, I love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app and like us on Facebook. And check us out next time. Thank you so much.